Hi, everyone. I'm just hopping on to get started. It's 7:05, so we let some folks roll in. And for the folks who are coming on right now, I just wanted to introduce myself. I am Kristen Gonzalez. I'm the state senator for District 59, which is a tri-borough Senate district in Western Queens, Astoria, Long Island City, Northern Brooklyn, in Greenpoint, Williamsburg, and the east side of Manhattan from 14th to where the UN is. So we have a ton of workers in our district, and a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Queens. My mom is a member of U of T. She's a proud paraprofessional, which is a teacher that works with autistic and Down syndrome and within the special ed program of our DOE. And I think this webinar is incredibly important, has been a priority for this office because as someone who has seen the power just having a union job can have, whether it's giving us a living wage, adequate health care, and for my mom, even the ability to go back to school and get her bachelor's degree, there's so many benefits of having a union job. And then in addition, as someone who has also been a worker and needed to work in order to pay my own bills as a working New Yorker, I also know that when you don't have an organized workplace, it really does shift the balance of power into the hands of the few and the hands of management. And that can deeply impact all of our lives, from the hours we're working, the quality of our workspace, and how we're treated. And we deserve to be treated with dignity. So I am so excited today to welcome some experts in this space to talk to all of you and give you the resources and knowledge on how to organize your workplace. So with that, I'm actually going to introduce our panelists and who is here with us tonight. And then we can go ahead and get started with some Q&A. I will add that we are taking questions, but you can use the Q&A functionality at the bottom of your Zoom in order to get on Slack, ask a question, and then we'll leave time at the end to review. So with that, I want to start by introducing Grace Reckers, who is a senior organizer at OPEIU based in Minnesota and an EWOC volunteer organizer. We also have Diego Ramirez, who's an organizer at the Lower East Side Trader Joe's and EWOC volunteer. They've been organizing there for 3.5 years with the help of EWOC. And then last, but certainly not least, we have Andrea Joseph, who's a postdoctoral researcher at Mount Sinai and was recently elected president of UAW Local 4100, which represents 2,100 postdoctoral workers in New York City from Mount Sinai and Columbia University. Love to see another woman elected leader. So with that, we really do have such a wealth of knowledge and diverse experiences on this panel. They are the experts on this, not me. So I'm just going to be asking some questions and excited for the conversation. So kicking it off, questions for all of you on getting involved. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you got involved in the union effort in your workplace? And I think I'll pass it to Andrea because you're first on my on my squares, I guess, for Zoom. And then Andrea, you can pass it to the next person.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks so much for having me here. I'm really excited and looking forward to the conversation. When I started my postdoc research at Mount Sinai, the union effort was already underway. Postdocs at Columbia University had actually formed the first postdoc union in the private sector a few years earlier. And at Sinai, postdocs had won their union election with a 90% margin about 10 months before I started, and they had already been in bargaining for 7 months. I knew that I wanted to jump right in and get involved because I had experienced the benefits of a union as a graduate student at the University of Washington, where our union contract, got me annual raises, fantastic insurance coverage, free transit passes, and all these benefits that made a huge difference to me as a poor graduate student. So before I started at Sinai, I reached out to organizers of the union to see how I could get involved. There was actually an opening on the bargaining committee around the same time I started, so I got involved that way as well as the organizing committee. when we were fighting for our first contract, it was really essential to coordinate our organizing and bargaining efforts. And ultimately, this led to a 12-day strike last December, which was the first one for postdocs at a private university. And that ended in a historic contract that includes the highest postdoc salary minimums nationwide, job security for the first time for our postdocs, and many other protections. It's been really awesome to, get involved and be part of this team. I'll pass it to Grace.
I will speak a bit more about my work as an EWOC volunteer organizer in a moment, but I'm actually going to pass it to Diego so they can talk a little bit about getting involved in their union at Trader Joe's.
So, yeah, I've been at Trader Joe's for about 4 years now, but our organizing efforts began during the pandemic, COVID-19. Just the protocols and standards were all over the place, and a lot of people, including myself, my coworkers, were just feeling very unsafe, unprotected, and so I was approached by a coworker who was talking with another one of our coworkers about, doing something about this. And I was just immediately on board. And we ended up through that getting connected with somebody from EWOC. And at that time, we were just organizing around COVID safety issues. Like, I know that we weren't allowed to wear masks or have any like gloves or safety things until it was mandated by the state. A lot of the social distancing protocols and like our plexiglasses would come and go as like management pleased. So we were just talking to people, asking them what they wanted and stuff. And eventually, as the pandemic sort of evolved, other workplace issues evolved with that. And we decided that we actually wanted to pursue a union. And EWOC, of course, was there along the way to help us out. And we were actually able to have an election last year. Unfortunately, it was a tie, which counts as a win for the company. But I can get more into that later because there is an exciting timeline with that still to be had. So, yeah, I could pass it back to Grace.
Sure. And so I'm actually a staff organizer at a union called OPEIU, which stands for the Office of Professional Employees International Union. That's my full-time day job, but I also organize voluntarily with EWOC, which is the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee. Feels like I can't get enough organizing, apparently. But my role as a staff organizer is to help workers like Andrea, like Diego, through the steps of actually winning a union in your workplace. It typically happens where a worker will reach out to us and they say, we want to form a union. And this is true for us as an EWOC volunteer organizer as well. People reach out saying, I want to organize my workplace. I've talked with a few other people, or I've talked with a group of people, or maybe I'm just starting. And I want to know how to do so. How do we actually go through the process? I don't know if many or any of you have actually like tried Googling like how do you form a union. It can be really confusing. I also know that like I was never taught in school how to form a union. There's a reason for that. But it can be a confusing process if you're not really aware. And so the purpose of having people at EWOC and other unions who walk you through the process is so that everybody has the resources and guidance they need to build not just a union that can win, but actually a strong enough union that can get past the contract fight, which will always be challenging. So we can talk about like what the contract fight looks like a bit, but you want to make sure that you're winning with enough of a margin that you're ready to endure all the challenges ahead. But again, my role as an EWOC organizer is to help people through that process as well, because a lot of people have tried reaching out to unions, and maybe those unions don't have capacity for those particular campaigns for various reasons. And so the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee formed as a response to an overwhelming amount of people who needed union representation, collective bargaining rights, and there's a grassroots movement to help workers through that process.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I can personally vouch for the work that EWOC does. I've heard so many good stories from folks who have reached out. So for anyone tuning in today who hasn't heard of them before or was considering maybe reaching out, definitely always worth it. And really excited to have you join us and speak to that experience. So, you talked about how if you just go online and try to Google on your own how to start a union, it's not the most straightforward process. But a lot of times it starts with even just talking to your coworker, and that can be challenging. So do you all have advice for how to begin having organizing conversations with your coworkers? And I instead of, I guess the best way to do this, we can do like raise hand function and then take stack. Maybe, I don't know, or you guys can pass it to each other, but
I can
I
start
say
us off.
go for it. Yeah.
So I would say, if there's something that you feel like is an issue to you at your workplace, more often than not, a lot of other people there are feeling the same way. And it's true what they say, like kind of these close friend rants about what's going on at work can lead to organizing eventually. So kind of like I mentioned before, a lot of our stuff started during the COVID-19 pandemic, and I know that there were certain things that I did not feel comfortable with, such as when they removed kind of like our social distancing protocol a bit early, and we had some plexiglass at our registers that they took down without any warning, and there was just a big lack of communication with all these things that left a lot of people feeling blindsided. And just kind of like hearing from a few of my close coworkers, I was able to kind of start branching out to other people, sort of just checking in, like, oh hey, like, how do you feel about how they took away this plexiglass, or how we're not doing social distancing anymore, and just kind of giving people that platform to voice, what they're feeling, and you can continue to build on that, let them know like, oh, me and a few other people are feeling this way too. Would you be interested in doing something about it? We're kind of talking about, whether it could be forming a petition, doing some sort of collective action, or forming a union. But you can just use that as a launching pad, and it can be very low stakes. It's just a way to kind of like gauge these conversations and see what people's concerns are. And you want to hear it from them. You want it to be organic, kind of like leading them in the conversation, but not necessarily like forcing it upon them. And I think that's kind of like was the best way we were able to get this momentum going with people. But yeah, just branching out, talking to your friends, it can lead to so much more.
Yeah, I would echo everything that Diego said. I mean, getting into that organizing conversation and making sure you're doing mostly listening, trying to draw out concerns and their motivations, that's really important. For us, another piece that I might want to highlight is that it's really about finding leaders and developing a leader structure. Something we've been, that we've tried during this whole union effort is to maintain a broad and representative network of leaders in every part of the workplace, so that we're always able to reach everyone, and everyone knows who they can turn to and ask a question to or talk about issues with when that comes up. Our approach is usually to ask direct questions, be to the point when we're having conversations, and not seem very disruptive. But again, just to go back to, it's about listening, figuring out what people are already frustrated with, asking open-ended questions. And then for us, by doing this systematically in every lab, every floor building that postdocs are in, that's really how we were able to mobilize postdocs towards our strike and an awesome contract.
Amazing. Any last comments before moving on to talking about filing with the National Labor Relations Board once you've talked to enough coworkers?
I'll just quickly jump in and say I know one-on-ones can be scary. It's also the thing that I bring up the most. Like, if you can have a one-on-one conversation with your coworkers, you will be a good organizer. Like, that is the absolute crux of organizing. It is the bone. I mean, I'm sure the senator knows that too, of just like talking one-on-one with constituents is the only way to build real trust and support. And I always like remind people that sending information over a group text, over an email, is not going to have nearly the same weight or impact as like going up to somebody, even on the phone, but in person, and talking with them about why they need to be part of this effort. So I know it's easy to take the shortcut and send us like a text or a group message, but I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to have those one-on-ones.
Yeah, I totally agree. I can speak from an organizing perspective around any issue. The personal touch, the one-on-one is just invaluable. There's literally no amount of money in the world that can buy how impactful having someone who deeply cares about something talk to another person about it. And it makes people feel so much more invested. So certainly encourage folks. It is the best organizing strategy. Even though it can be for sure, especially when you're doing things like knocking doors. In this case, you're talking to your coworkers, but when it's not like a person maybe you're particularly close with or someone who kind of for all intents and purposes feels a little bit like a stranger, it can be scary. It's still worth it. So before we get into the National Labor Relations Board, I was wondering, Grace, if you'd give us a quick primer for those on the call who aren't familiar with who they are on just what the board is and how they operate.
Sure. So the National Labor Relations Board, or the NLRB, or you'll also hear it referred to as the board, is the agency in the US government that mediates union relations between workers and employers. The National Labor Relations Board is also responsible for the National Labor Relations Act, or the NLRA. The National Labor Relations Act there's a history of it, but originally written in 1935. The key pieces of the NLRA, or the act, that you should know as a worker who's interested in organizing are Section 7 and Section 8. So Section 7 says that you have the right as an employee to talk about organizing, to form a union, to talk to your coworkers about a union, to participate in union activities, to vote for a union. It essentially says you're allowed to participate in what they call concerted union activity. Section 8 says that an employer cannot retaliate against you or discriminate against you for your support in that union or for your involvement in concerted union activities. So I just highlight that because some people reach out to me and they're like, are unions legal? Because there's so much stigma around them that some people don't know, because there's like a lot of it has sometimes a bad connotation in the media for a reason. But the NLRB is who carries out most of the union elections and deals with violations from employers against employees.
Thank you so much, Grace. So before even getting to the point where the National Labor Relations Board is ready to step in and do a vote, I wonder if, Andrea or Diego, if you can speak a little bit to the lead up. So you were talking to your coworkers, how you were like organizing your workplace. So the lead up to the vote, and then about the vote and kind of the aftermath in your workplace. So actually, I'm going to go in reverse this time and turn it to Diego and then to Andrea.
Yeah, so if you're having these conversations with your coworkers and you decide that a union is kind of what you want to pursue, you're gonna have to start signing these little cards that you'll get. And that's kind of like when you have a majority of those, it's legally, I believe, like 30%, but of course you want to aim for as much as you can get. That's gonna kind of be your signifier that people in your workplace are interested in forming a union. And I would say this is like the time when these one-on-ones are really, really, really important and crucial, because arguably signing a card with your name on it is a lot more nerve-wracking and scary than, casting an anonymous vote, I would say, even though obviously the vote holds a lot more weight. Getting somebody to sign a card can be a daunting task, especially when there is all this stigma around unions. And during this time, it does have to be a little more hush hush, because there are less protections until you go public, which can make it even more nerve-wracking. But that's when, you really want to start building trust with your coworkers and, start having a systemic plan. If you are just talking amongst your close friends and close circles at work, you're not going to branch out to everybody. You want to be sure that you have people on your organizing team that can reach out to these people, expand your sort of web of connections, I like to say. And your organizing committee should be a reflection, of your greater workplace. That's the only way that you're going to be able to reach everybody. So once you go through and you get enough cards, you really want to reach about 70 to 80%, 80% ideally. You send them off to the NLRB, and then that is how you officially apply for an election. They'll set a date and a place for you to have your vote. And during that time, you can start more formally like campaigning at work. This is when it's important to know what kind of rights you have in terms of like sharing literature and the conversations that you can have. And of course, management will be filing their own campaign against the union to try and persuade people. So you really want to get a head start on inoculating people, which if folks here aren't familiar with the term inoculating, it's just kind of like getting people informed about what's going to happen. And you want to do this before you try to kind of like sneak this in with your card signing, so that when things go public, people don't get persuaded or dissuaded by the sort of like conflict and rhetoric coming from management. It's going to be your strongest tool in winning that vote. Because even if you do have like a majority of cards signed, there is still room for people to change their minds. So you want to really fortify them and secure their trust. Um, and yeah, even for myself, kind of like being mentally prepared for what that time was going to look like, it was still a huge shock when we went public and kind of just seeing the emotions and tensions that erupted during that time. And it can be daunting and hard not to get swept away in that. But, it's also important to remember that, why you're doing this, that, you're doing this because most of the people in your workplace want to make things better and you want to help each other out. And it's a good time to really rally that spirit, I would say, for as many sort of like scary and hard conversations and kind of emotions that were flying during that time. We also had equally uplifting, inspiring moments through rallies or like little actions like wearing buttons or coordinating like wearing a red shirt day. And these are ways for people to, kind of see each other and, to practice the solidarity and get everybody feeling excited and remind us that, this is a good thing. This is something that we should be celebrating. And I always emphasize that because, like I said, it can get very intense and it's hard to keep morale up through that. And management will want to foster that kind of like hostility because they will say, oh, this conflict is happening because of the union. Like we would not be fighting if it weren't for the union, but there's a reason that you're doing this and you have to fortify your cause. Um, did you want me to also speak about the aftermath of our votes?
Actually, yes. And I feel like maybe unpacking a little bit more, we can like have that be the second part
Mhm.
of the question for both of you. But I'm so curious, like so like when you say inoculate or just organize people in to understand what you're doing, like what did those conversations look like? Like what questions were people asking? Was there anything that like people really like latched onto and like resonated, or things that like you didn't anticipate, pushback, things like that?
A lot of it was just kind of like letting people know what their rights are, and especially like just in having conversations about like unionizing at work and sort of what to expect too, what they were going to hear from management. We kind of had like a little bingo card about all the kind of things, the misinformation
Wow.
that they might hear. And so, it's a lot of preparing people for that. People, of course, too, want to inquire what your goals are in terms of like when you are able to get to the bargaining table. So it's important to kind of have these things ready, and also, to get feedback. I always tell people, this is a learning process for us. It's not going to work unless we move forward with what you want to move forward with too. And just kind of like, getting people ready to be involved. And not just be kind of like a neutral, like, oh, whatever happens at work to me happens, like giving that kind of like agency and empowerment, I think is important. But also, yeah, just kind of preparing them for what management might throw at them to try and dissuade them. And a lot of people during that time would come up to this and be like, oh, we were told like, that this was going to happen, that we weren't going to be able to call out anymore, or that we wouldn't be able to work an extra hour or so. And we just had to be like, that is not true, and yeah, it's funny how kind of like much they follow a certain script.
Yeah, no, for sure. The tactics for management. it seems like they're all kind of, or most for the most part, working off the same union busting
Hmm.
playbook. But Andrea, do you want to speak to your experience?
Yeah, I was just gonna, echo again. I think Diego hit the nail totally on the head. Management is not that creative in what they're gonna say to union bust in this lead up to the election. They're gonna, say, give us another chance. We're ready to make improvements. They're gonna say, do you really want a third party, the union, to be negotiating for like on your behalf? There's like, we can work directly with the workers and the union would prevent that. And, at the end of the day, the union is the workers. So all of that is, as long as you can communicate that to everyone, like Diego was saying in the card drive, that, that's really important. That helps a lot. The other thing that's a little bit special, I think, about academic and higher ed organizing is the higher proportion of international workers. And so at Mount Sinai, 80% of our postdocs are international. And there are other tactics that management will use to kind of scare postdocs from voting in the election, threatening that there might be consequences for your visa, getting postdocs to question whether, if they're not a citizen, are they allowed to participate in activity like this. And, to what Grace was saying earlier, the NLRA protects all workers in union-related activities. So it was something that we had to really focus on inoculating our postdocs on, and it happened, but we were able to be successful despite that by having a solid leadership structure and a lot of one-on-ones.
Incredible. And then of course we have the question of the vote and then the aftermath. So do you guys want to talk to what that looked and felt like?
Yeah, so for us, our voting was set for 2 days, and it happened inside our store, which was definitely a bit of a disadvantage for us because it allowed management to sort of catch people like literally as they were heading in to the voting room. We saw them like literally stationed right outside the entrance. And I would say during that time was definitely the most intensely heated period. You're really trying to make sure that you kind of like are ahead of the game, and you really like this is where the organized part of like organizing, I feel like, really shines through, like checking in with everybody, making sure people are voting and that they have your votes. And it can be a little overwhelming sometimes to feel like you're pestering these people, but you have to be certain and secure that you are gaining their trust and not allowing these kind of like last minute sways. So for us, unfortunately, we did lose our election. It was a tie, 76 to 76 votes, which, because it is not a majority for us, it goes to the company. So that was really unfortunate and just a really kind of like weird place to come out of, because a tie doesn't necessarily feel like a loss. To have half the store voting for a union, I think that's not a majority. It's not the minority of the store. So you're just kind of left with this weird split going on. And it was definitely difficult to kind of keep morale up after that. And a lot of people were feeling defeated. Their fears that, for some people, they were like, oh, the company will never allow it to happen, even if they themselves wanted to see these changes. We're already in this sort of defeatist mindset that, the big bucks are always going to win. And so it was hard to kind of like see that affirm for them. But we decided, these issues that we were organizing around did not disappear, became maybe even more so prevalent after losing our votes. So we just continued to move forward as if we had won that election, because, we still had a large number of supporters. There were still other things that we can do, like certain collective actions. And I think we were able to see a lot of success in that. And to be able to do that without a legal union really gave people a lot of hope. And it was just, even for myself, to know that we were able to do that still, I think really speaks to just the power of workers and what we can do. Like I would say one of our biggest accomplishments was we had two managers that were just very problematic, harassing a lot of people, and we were able to organize petitions and walkouts and eventually get them transferred out of the store. And to see that happen, that was pretty big for us. Was incredible, and to hear people too come up to me and be like, "Wow, I feel so much less on edge coming into work, knowing that I'm not going to have to put up with that." And even now, people come to us with their issues rather than going to management first because they feel like we're going to actually hear them out and, be proactive about it. So I feel like that only reaffirms kind of like what our mission and what our goal is, and to have people seeing that and practicing it with us is very exciting and it feels good. Um, but also another update. So there is this order within the NLRB called a CEMEX order, which is new, which if you have enough of these instances where a management is doing illegal union busting called unfair labor practices or ULPs, and show that you had a majority of cards signed, the NLRB can determine that you had an unfair election and actually flip the results. So as soon as we found out about that, we filed through that because we had numerous instances of these ULPs and illegal union busting. And I can't say for certain right now, but we have very, very, very strong um, reason to believe that the NLRB has found merit in our case. And so hopefully we'll be hearing some good news from that soon. But yeah, so there are other avenues too. You can achieve these things through many different ways, and I think it's exciting to see that, to know that there isn't always necessarily one clear cut route, and to always just kind of like be open to these things.
Amazing. I actually do want to pause here very quickly before turning it to you, Andrea. I'm gonna turn it. I do have like conflicting events tonight, so I have to hop off. But I am turning it to Shauna Morlock, who is our community affairs director in our office, and also another incredible organizer, to continue the conversation and then take questions at the end, because I see we have a couple in the chat. So just want to say thank you both so much. Thank you, Grace. Thank you, Shauna, Andrea, Diego. It was really lovely. And shout out to everyone who's taking their Wednesday night to learn how to organize their workplace. Okay, Shauna, you can take it away.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sure people were wondering what this weird lady was doing on the call as well. But yeah, like Senator Gonzalez has said, my name is Shauna Morlock. I am her Director of Community Affairs. And yeah, it's my pleasure to help to facilitate the rest of this call. So as she noted, we're going to turn it over to Andrea, but would love to hear what it's like being on a bargaining committee. I mean, said that you're on your union's bargaining committee. Just tell us all about what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, is there an echo maybe? Okay. Yeah, so in the aftermath of the union election, it's super exciting. I wasn't there for our union's election, but I have heard, the stories of how great it felt for the whole organizing committee and also all the postdocs at Sinai, and jumped right in and basically elected a bargaining committee, democratically set bargaining priorities by going back to that leader structure and one-on-one conversations, asking workers, what do you want to see improved here? What are the issues that matter most to you? And got started with the work of the bargaining committee. This is such important work, and I also found it to be really fun. As a committee, I would say we had two goals. Our first goal was to win the best contract possible for our workers in the shortest time possible. And then second, to raise standards for unionized postdocs across the country. And so to win the best contract possible for workers, we were, having those conversations, democratically deciding our priorities. And then at the same time, once we started having these bargaining sessions, we used that time to really understand management's concerns of, why they weren't giving us these rights and protections, and then kind of attacking those arguments. I remember one of our big fights was related to job security. So they really wanted postdocs to be on a probationary period of 6 months, and no other postdoc union has a probationary period, so we didn't want that at all. And eventually they gave us their reason. It was because if they weren't careful enough during the hiring process, they wanted to have the right to fire someone soon after in case of like a bad fit or personality issue. This allowed us to campaign around, Sinai is asking us to move cities, move countries often to work here, but they still want the right to terminate us if it's, ultimately their fault. They didn't do a good job in the hiring process. That's just not fair. And so ultimately, even though this issue wasn't affecting the majority of workers, we were able to get a strong majority to fight against probationary periods, and we ended up winning that fight. The other thing I think I mentioned earlier is the close link that's really important between organizing and bargaining. It's so important to keep having, for people in the bargaining committee, to keep having those conversations with workers, because that's how you know what's important and what you're fighting for, and also where you have room to move or to compromise. And along with that, you want to make sure that your actions, organizing wise and bargaining wise, are coordinated. For example, management was delaying meeting with us throughout last summer. We had waited like 3 months to hear back on our proposals for all of the economic articles like salary and childcare, parental leave, things like that. And on the organizing side, we then turned up the pressure by taking a strike authorization vote, and then that got them back to the bargaining table with their first response to the economic articles. To talk briefly about looking at postdoc union contracts across the country and making sure that we're like raising the standards, that was another important part of our work as a bargaining committee. For every article and every issue we were fighting for, we were looking directly at what other postdoc unions had won. And we tried really hard to at least keep up with that minimum, and in some cases go beyond that. And that's already having a positive feed forward effect. We know that the Weill Cornell Medicine postdocs are bargaining right now, and the issues that we've won are kind of now their starting place, and it's their what they're doing is elevating standards or trying to elevate standards even higher, and so that makes that's the kind of change that our union is fighting for, and that all unions are fighting for. And we're always happy to chat with any other unions or organizers who are entering this phase.
Yeah, sharing knowledge across workplaces is, really showing solidarity and making sure that you're looking out for your brothers and sisters, your union brothers and sisters is really inspiring. So I think this might be a little bit of a shorter question. I was going to ask, how long does it usually take to win a first contract? I feel like this is maybe not something that a lot of folks know. Could I give this one to Grace?
Sure. It's a range. I've been on some campaigns where it's taken, in very good scenarios, it's taken 3 to 4 months, which is very quick. And then I've been on some campaigns where it's taken up to 2 years. So that's not ideal. It can take more than that. There's a variety of factors, but your employer will try to scare you by saying it'll take 5 years. You'll never get a contract. It'll take 2 years, but it can happen faster. So I would aim for 6 months if you can.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And let's get at least one more question in here. So after, the contract's won and, there's times when you still don't feel like your employer is doing right by yourself and your coworkers. What is it like coming to the decision that a strike is necessary? Have any of you been on strike, or let us know what that's like? Andrea?
Yeah, to win our contract. I'm sorry, I hear that. Okay, cool. To win our contract, we did end up going on a 12-day strike last December. It's never an easy decision to call for a strike. It involves, you want a supermajority of workers to stop working and potentially lose pay. But ultimately, we felt like striking was our only option left to get a fair contract by the end of the year. Like Grace said, our goal was to get a contract in 6 months. That didn't happen. We had passed the 12-month mark, and we wanted that brought us to October, and we didn't want it to get into a new year without the fair contract that postdocs had been fighting years for at that point. I mentioned the strike authorization vote we took that finally got, the responses to all of our economic proposals. That was kind of a really strong example that showed postdocs that mass action works to move things at the bargaining table. And so beyond that, we were continuing to do rallies and we set continuing to have hundreds of conversations. We had the strike authorization. The next step was to ask postdocs, what would you need? What issues would you be willing to go on strike for? And then once we had heard from hundreds of postdocs on that, can you commit to actually going on strike? And then, building consensus around that, or building a super majority around that, and then finally getting postdocs to actually sign up for picket shifts and making this strike a reality. In order to make that successful, we were really dialed in on our organizing structure, making sure that there were leaders on every floor in every building, making sure we were kind of escalating these conversations and the pressure on Sinai throughout the campaign. Actually, going on strike was so crazy. Kind of around the time in the weeks leading up to the strike, Sinai had actually caved to most of our demands. They gave us a 24% increase in our salaries. They gave us paid parental leave that we had been fighting for so long for. They gave us protections against workplace bullying and the job security protections, but we were still far apart on a few major priorities. Housing was a big one for postdocs. Childcare support was another big one. And so after consulting with leaders across campus, we decided to go ahead with the plan to go on strike. So for those 12 days, we had a majority of postdocs out on the picket line. We're really grateful for a lot of community support, support from elected leaders, including DSA endorsed leaders like Senator Gonzalez. Other unions came out to support us. We also did fun events on the picket line. We had a local fitness instructor come teach a class for everyone out on the picket line. And then, eventually at the end of that, Sinai called a bargaining session, agreed to our demand for some additional childcare and housing, a fund that could be used for housing and childcare costs. It was such an exhausting time, but it was really, really worth it by the end.
That's awesome. Thank you for laying that out. Has anyone else here had the experience of going on strike? Want to add anything?
I've taken groups on strikes. Another thing, the employer will oftentimes threaten to say don't form a union, they'll make you strike. And like Andrea was saying, it is the last tool in your arsenal, and it's also your decision. And that, like, it's not because you want to go on strike, it's because the employer has put you in such a hole with negotiating. That it's the most powerful tool that we have as workers. But we use it sparingly. And the you hear about strikes because they're so rare, right? Like it makes it seem like every union strikes, and vast majority of the time they don't. But it's exciting when they do.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that. So I just wanted to use the last few minutes that we have here to check out some questions that we had from folks watching. Great. So Emily from the chat says, how do you respond to folks who know that it's illegal at the state level for their class of worker? Like, so in a grad student, workers in Ohio, doctors, etc., to collectively bargain. Yeah. So
it's tricky. This is a tricky one. Yeah, I can take a stab at it. I don't typically work with public sector groups, and especially in right to work states. But there are, I know EWOC does help with some of that. But just for people who maybe aren't aware, especially in states, typically red states are what you call right to work, which is a bit of a misnomer. It means that you can form a union, but not everybody has to pay dues to that union, which means that the union still has to service everybody. It still has to represent everybody fairly, but it's not getting the resources it needs. But then also in a lot of those states, public sector employees don't have actual collective bargaining rights. There are still ways that those groups of workers can organize and can make demands and can participate in collective action. Unfortunately, it's not a silver bullet other than like try to change those laws. They have changed. Like in Virginia, that did change recently, but it's pretty nasty out there. I wish I had more of a response.
Yeah, no. Yeah, thank you for tackling that. I do want to flag as well that if anyone else has a question, we've got another one coming up, but if there are more questions, if you hit the circle on the bottom that says more with the 3 dots, and there's a Q&A section there, you can put your questions in the chat. So our second question is, are any of you able to speak on the unionization of public employees, specifically librarians, if possible? Should we give that one to Grace as well?
Sure. So yeah, so this just kind of goes back to it. So in New York, there's better protections and rights for public sector workers that are organizing. I don't want to misstate the New York law, the New York State law on this, but some states and some municipalities have actually like card check for public sector workers, which is actually a really good thing. It means that if you get a majority of your workplace on board and actually sign union cards, you automatically get recognized if a majority of people sign those union cards. So that's called Card Check, and that's actually a great resource. I don't know the New York City law on that. I know in New Jersey that's the case. But public sector workers can still, in many states, still have collective bargaining rights, can still organize, can still win their union. There is just that the nature of what we call Janus. There was a decision in 2018 that the Supreme Court decided that said that public sector unions also are now what we call open shop, which is what I was describing earlier of if your workplace forms a union, people can choose whether or not to pay dues and be part of that union, even though they're still represented. So I would just look into some of the state and city laws, but absolutely still organized. There's a lot of really powerful public sector unions to look into, and they've had major victories. Librarians, also, we just organized a small shop at OPEIU. We organized a small shop of librarians in Northampton, Massachusetts. This is private sector, is at a private university, but there are librarian unions.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say that an important thing for us was to connect with other unions who had kind of done what we wanted to do before us. And so I think it would be really important if I were in this situation to really look for a librarian union and kind of see how they tackled a similar challenge.
Thank you. I'm gonna give it a couple more minutes for folks to like put another question or two in, but I maybe wanted to do like a happy question. We had this another question that I didn't think we'd have time to get to, but like we heard, you know, what it's like to very, very narrowly miss, unionization. But like, what is it like when you win a contract?
I can take that. I guess one moment, it's hard to pick a moment. One moment where it felt like we won a contract was the day of our last bargaining session. Of course, you never know that it's your last bargaining session, but for us, we kind of had an idea of what they were going to propose, what Sinai was going to propose, and if it was what we hoped based on the conversations we were having with postdocs, we were ready to, that contract would have the majority support of our postdocs, and so that day I was super, super anxious. And I was just like hoping everything would go according to plan. And thankfully it did. So that was an amazing feeling, after 14 months of bargaining or more, that like it was all over. I wouldn't be in another bargaining session. And then another moment I could pick is like winning the ratification vote. So we had all the postdocs vote to ratify the contract in the following week. That vote had super high participation. About 80% of our postdocs participated, and 98% of them voted in favor of the contract. And so that was also really rewarding and an awesome feeling to feel like not only were we done bargaining, but that the postdocs, the workers, really believed that it was the strongest possible contract, and it really was a historic contract that we won. But at the same time, what I was excited for the whole time we were bargaining was to have a contract and then implement and enforce it to make sure that postdocs were actually experiencing all of the new benefits and rights that we had won. And so my favorite part of this whole process has actually been, the stage we're in right now, making sure our union stays strong. And so, I can highly recommend all phases of this process, as long as you have a strong leader structure and are always organizing.
Always be organizing for sure. We're going to squeeze one last one in. So the question was to you, Andrea. Again, sorry, I keep putting you on the spot. So I'm going to ask, why are there so many academic workers joining UAW?
That's a funny question. Well, I think that there's really a nationwide movement happening right now. With like the year before we went on strike, tens of thousands of academic workers at the University of California had gone on strike and won a historic contract. They were with the UAW. It was something that we watched and inspired us in our campaign, and we connected with those workers for advice and feedback, and we're passing that forward. I mentioned the Cornell postdocs that are bargaining right now. Postdocs at the Einstein College of Medicine just won their union election, and I think it's our unions are visible, our unions are winning a lot, our unions are talking to each other and helping each other out. And yeah, it's an exciting time to be an academic worker. And if anyone on the call is one or wants to connect, we're always happy to talk.
Awesome. Well, thank you very, very much. I'm just gonna kind of wrap it up here. We're like, looks like we're wrapping right on time, but I just wanted to say from this office that we really, truly appreciate all of you giving your time, not only to like organizing your organizing time, but to our office and to help to educate folks on what their rights are and what this process looks like, and just to know what to expect, because you know, going into any of this can probably feel a little daunting. So just the more information that constituents have, and not only constituents, but everyone online, you know, really it's incredibly helpful. So just wanted to say thank you, and to give you all an opportunity, if there's anything you'd like to say in closing, feel free.
I'm always happy. Reach out. I'm guessing for the others as well, but I'm always happy to talk more about this, offer advice. But also, yeah, reach out to EWOC, other unions. They should have resources too.
All workers deserve a union. So if you don't have one, you should start one.
Yeah, and I would say, as much as it is a fight and a battle, it's also a celebration. And I always want to remind people that. And yeah, reach out to Ewok. They're awesome. Like so awesome. And if you want to follow what's going on with us at Trader Joe's, we have a little Instagram, Trader Joe's United, for any exciting little updates there.
Love it. I'm just going to also point out that Grace put her email contact into the chat if anybody else would like to do so as well. Yeah. And this webinar will also be posted onto our Senate website, so onto Senator Gonzalez's website. So this lives as a tool for anyone to refer back to if they need it. All right. So thank you all so very much for your time, and for everyone who tuned in. And yeah, can't wait to see y'all out organizing.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.